In the quiet suburb where I lived, life always seemed to follow a predictable pattern. The days merged into one another, indistinguishable and monotonous. I, a 32-year-old woman, found myself trapped in this monotony, with two children to care for and a marriage that had long since lost its spark. My husband, the father of my children, had become more of a roommate than a partner over the years. Our conversations were limited to necessities, devoid of the warmth and affection that once defined us. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment our love started to fade, but now, all that was left were the remnants of a relationship that once held so much promise. One day, as I stood watching my youngest daughter play with her friends, I realized how deeply unhappy I was. I yearned for something, anything, that could break the suffocating routine of my daily life. That's when my neighbor, a man in his late 40s, entered my life in a way I never expected. We had crossed paths several times before, exchanging polite smiles and casual greetings. His daughter was in the same class as mine, a coincidence that brought us into each other's orbit more frequently. But it wasn't until the school year began that I noticed his interest in me. He had a charm about him, a confidence that I found intriguing, despite knowing he was older than he claimed 49, not 45. As I had learned from a quick online search, I felt drawn to him. I never confronted him about his little lie. It seemed unnecessary. There was a thrill in this silent acknowledgement of his attempt to impress me. As the weeks passed, our casual encounters became more frequent. His warm greetings in the presence of his wife, the stolen glances when she wasn't looking, it all felt like a prelude to something forbidden yet exciting. One autumn afternoon, while our children played in the schoolyard, he struck up a conversation that felt different from our previous exchanges. His words were laced with compliments, subtle yet direct, making my heart race in a way it hadn't for years. He spoke of mundane things at first, but the conversation quickly turned personal. He mentioned how fortunate my husband must be, a statement that made me pause. It was then that I confessed something I had kept buried within me. I told him, in a voice barely above a whisper, that I no longer cared for my husband. The indifference in my tone surprised even me. I realized that I was not afraid of my husband finding out about any indiscretions. I was doing what I wanted, for the first time in a long while, and his opinion mattered little to me now. My neighbor looked at me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. It was as if he saw right through me, understanding the depth of my loneliness and dissatisfaction. That moment marked the beginning of our secret affair, an affair that promised to shatter the monotony of my life, but also threatened to upend everything I knew. In the following days, our interactions became more frequent and intimate. We shared knowing looks, whispered conversations, and laughter that seemed to fill a void in my heart. The risk of what we were doing only added to the thrill, the excitement of engaging in something so profoundly against the norms of our small community. But amidst this newfound excitement, a nagging thought lingered in the back of my mind. I was embarking on a path that could lead to heartbreak and scandal, yet I couldn't find it in myself to care. I was too caught up in the moment, too desperate to feel alive again. As I lay in bed each night, listening to the steady breathing of my husband, I couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would this affair be the escape I longed for, or would it be the catalyst for my life's unraveling? Only time would tell, but for now, I was willing to risk it all for a taste of the unknown, for a chance to feel something, anything, other than the numbing emptiness of my everyday existence. As autumn leaves began to paint the streets in shades of red and gold, so too did my life start to change color. The mundane routines that once defined my existence gave way to a series of secret encounters and stolen moments with my neighbor. Each glance, each whispered word, felt like a step further into a world far removed from my unfulfilling marriage. It all started with a seemingly innocent proposal to meet at the local park. The children were our alibi, playing innocently, oblivious to the undercurrents between their parents. There, amidst the laughter of children and the rustling of leaves, we talked. It was the kind of conversation that revealed more in its silences than in words. He spoke of his own marriage, a union that, like mine, had lost its spark. His honesty was disarming, and in those moments, I saw in him a kindred spirit, someone else trapped in the facade of a happy domestic life. The more we talked, the more evident it became that we were both seeking an escape, a way to fill the voids in our hearts. Our meetings at the park became a regular affair. Each rendezvous was a mix of casual chatter and intimate confessions. We spoke about everything and nothing, our conversations meandering like the winding paths around us. The more time we spent together, the more I found myself drawn to him. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time, a mixture of anticipation, excitement, and a hint of guilt. Then came the day when our interactions took a decisive turn. As we sat on a secluded bench, watching our children play at a distance, he turned to me with a look that sent a jolt of electricity through my body. He spoke of his desire, of how he had been thinking about me, how he wished I lived next door so he could see me every day. His words, spoken with a sincerity that was almost palpable, left me breathless. In that moment, I realized how much I craved attention and affection. My marriage had become a shell of formalities, and here was someone who saw me, who desired me. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. The boundaries of our relationship were blurring, and I found myself at a crossroads. Our first kiss happened days later. It was a moment stolen under the cover of dusk, away from prying eyes. His lips on mine were a shock to my system, awakening a part of me I thought had long since withered away. The kiss was brief but intense, leaving us both gasping for air and more aware than ever of the dangerous game we were playing. Our affair escalated quickly from there. We communicated through WhatsApp, sending messages late into the night while our spouses slept. Each message, each word, was a step further into uncharted territory. Our conversations were a mix of longing, desire, and the realities of our complicated lives. One night, when the opportunity presented itself, he came to see me. My husband was out, and his wife was busy with neighbors. The stars were our only witnesses as we embraced behind my house. It was a moment of passion and desperation, a physical manifestation of our emotional turmoil. The affair was like a fire, consuming and uncontrollable. We were both aware of the risks, yet we were unable to pull away. The more we indulged in our secret, the more intense our feelings grew. But with each stolen moment, the fear of discovery loomed larger. Our late-night conversations became our lifeline, a way to keep the connection alive even when we couldn't be together. We talked about everything, our dreams, our fears, and the uncertain future we were hurtling towards. It was a strange mix of reality and fantasy, a relationship built on fragile foundations. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. I was living a double life, a devoted mother and wife by day, a passionate lover by night. The duality of my existence was both thrilling and exhausting. I was torn between the stability of my marriage and the intoxicating allure of the affair. I knew that what we were doing was wrong, that we were risking everything for these stolen moments. But in his arms, none of that seemed to matter. I was addicted to the way he made me feel, alive, desired, and free. As I lay in bed each night, my mind would wander to him, to our next meeting, to the possibilities that lay ahead. The affair had become my escape from reality, a secret world where I could be someone else, someone unburdened by the expectations and disappointments of my everyday life. But as the days passed, the reality of our situation became harder to ignore. We were playing with fire, and the consequences of our actions were becoming increasingly difficult to overlook. The fear of getting caught, the guilt of betrayal, and the uncertainty of the future began to weigh heavily on my mind. Our secret liaisons were no longer just about passion. They were about finding solace in each other from the dissatisfaction of our respective lives. We were both seeking something that we couldn't find in our marriages. Yet, the more entangled we became, the more I realized the complexity of our situation. I began to notice the subtle changes in his demeanor. The initial excitement and recklessness were slowly being replaced by a sense of caution. He spoke less freely, often glancing over his shoulder as if afraid of being seen. The reality of our affair and its potential impact on our families was dawning on us. One morning, as I watched him interact with his daughter, a pang of guilt struck me. We were not just two individuals seeking happiness. We were parents, spouses, members of a community. The potential fallout of our actions extended far beyond the confines of our secret world. Despite these realizations, the pull towards him remained strong. Every message, every touch, every shared glance was a reminder of the intense connection we had forged. Yet, with each passing day, the fear of our affair being discovered grew. We were treading on dangerous ground, risking everything for moments of fleeting happiness. Our affair was a juxtaposition of passion and fear, excitement and guilt. It was a constant battle between heart and mind, desire and duty. As I navigated this complex web of emotions, I couldn't help but question the sustainability of our relationship. How long could we continue down this path before the inevitable happened? How long before the consequences of our actions caught up to us? As autumn faded into winter, the affair with my neighbor reached a pivotal point. Our secret meetings and late-night conversations had created a world of our own, a world built on passion and escapism. But as the days grew shorter and the nights colder, the reality of our situation began to cast a long, ominous shadow over our clandestine relationship. The thrill of the affair was intoxicating, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to navigate the complexities of our dual lives. The fear of discovery was ever present, a constant reminder of the potential fallout that could shatter our families and our reputations. Yet, despite these fears, we continued to meet, driven by a desire that seemed to defy reason. Our affair was no longer just a physical attraction, it had evolved into an emotional bond that neither of us had anticipated. We found solace in each other's company, sharing our dreams, fears, and frustrations. It was as if we were trying to fill the voids in our lives with each other's presence. However, with each stolen moment, the burden of guilt grew heavier. I was acutely aware of the deceit we were perpetrating. My husband, oblivious to the betrayal, continued his routine, while I lived a lie. The contrast between my two worlds was stark, and it weighed heavily on my conscience. The emotional turmoil was further compounded by the increasing risks we were taking. We had to be more careful, more discreet, as the likelihood of being caught loomed larger with each passing day. The stress of maintaining the facade in front of our families and friends was taking its toll. Our communication became more guarded, and our meetings more sporadic. The carefree nature of our early encounters had given way to a more somber reality. We both knew that we were walking a tightrope, and one misstep could lead to disaster. One evening, as I lay in bed next to my sleeping husband, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. The affair had brought excitement and passion into my life, but it had also brought fear and anxiety. The contradiction of my feelings was overwhelming. I longed for the moments with my neighbor, yet dreaded the potential consequences. The turning point came one chilly evening when he came to see me while our respective spouses were occupied. As we embraced under the cover of darkness, I felt a sense of foreboding. This wasn't just a passionate encounter, it was a moment of recklessness that could unravel everything we had been trying to keep hidden. As he held me, I could sense a change in his demeanor. There was a tension in his embrace, a hesitation in his touch. It was as if he too was beginning to realize the magnitude of our actions. The passion that once felt exhilarating now felt fraught with danger. Our secret world, once a refuge from our unfulfilling lives, was turning into a prison of our own making. The lies and deceit were building walls around us, and I found myself struggling to breathe. The affair, which had started as a means of escape, was now a source of constant anxiety and fear. In the days that followed, our communication became more strained. The playful banter and deep conversations were replaced by brief, cautious exchanges. We were both aware of the risks, and the fear of getting caught was affecting our interactions. As I reflected on the affair, I began to question the choices I had made. The initial excitement had blinded me to the potential consequences, but now I was faced with the reality of my actions. The guilt, the fear, and the uncertainty were consuming me. I realized that we had reached a crossroads. We could no longer continue down this path without facing the inevitable consequences. The affair had changed us both, but it was time to face the reality of our situation. The cold, hard truth was that our relationship was built on a foundation of lies and secrecy. It was unsustainable, and sooner or later, something had to give. The thought of ending the affair was heartbreaking, but the thought of continuing it was equally terrifying. As the chapter of our affair came to a close, I was left with a sense of loss and regret. The affair had brought moments of happiness, but it had also brought pain and complication. I was left to ponder the cost of our actions and the impact they would have on our lives. Winter had fully settled in, its icy grip turning the world outside into a frosty tableau. Inside, however, a different kind of chill had taken hold of my life. The affair, once a source of warmth and escape, had become a source of constant anxiety and fear. The turning point came one morning, a moment that would forever change the course of our relationship. It started like any other day, but as I prepared for the usual routines, I received a message from him that sent a wave of panic through me. He wanted to meet urgently, a request that was unusual given our cautious approach in recent weeks. The tone of his message was terse, a stark contrast to the affectionate words we once exchanged. We met at a secluded spot, away from the prying eyes of our neighborhood. The cold winter air was biting, but it was nothing compared to the icy tension between us. As soon as I saw his face, I knew something was wrong. The usual warmth in his eyes was replaced by a look of concern and fear. He wasted no time in revealing the reason for our urgent meeting. His wife had become suspicious. She hadn't found anything concrete, but her instincts had been alerted. He told me how she had started asking questions, probing into his whereabouts, and examining his phone. The walls were closing in, and the reality of our situation was becoming impossible to ignore. The news hit me like a physical blow. The possibility of our affair being discovered had always been a distant fear, but now it was a tangible threat. The implications were massive, not just for us, but for our families, our children. The thought of the pain and hurt that would ensue was overwhelming. As we stood there, shivering in the cold, a sense of desperation enveloped us. We realized that our careless whispers and stolen moments had led us to a precipice. We were no longer just two individuals seeking solace in each other. We were potential catalysts for a disaster that could ruin multiple lives. The conversation that followed was a blur of fear, regret, and frantic planning. We talked about ending the affair, about taking steps to distance ourselves from each other. But even as we discussed these measures, a part of me knew it was too late. The Pandora's box of our affair had been opened, and there was no going back. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I went through the motions of my daily life, but my mind was elsewhere. I was haunted by the thought of my husband discovering the truth, of my children being caught in the crossfire of our indiscretion. The guilt that I had managed to suppress for so long came crashing down on me with full force. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The darkness of the room mirrored the turmoil in my heart. I thought about my neighbor, about the moments we had shared, about the dreams we had whispered to each other in the dead of night. But now, those dreams seemed like distant memories, overshadowed by the looming nightmare of exposure. In the days that followed, our communication dwindled to almost nothing. The fear of being discovered had forced us into a state of virtual estrangement. Each day was a struggle, a balancing act between maintaining a semblance of normalcy and dealing with the internal chaos. The affair had reached its tipping point. We had crossed a line from which there was no return, and now we were facing the consequences. The once passionate and exhilarating relationship had turned into a source of dread and regret. As the chapter of our affair drew to a close, I was left to confront the harsh reality of our actions. The consequences of our choices were no longer just a distant possibility, they were an imminent threat. The affair had brought us moments of happiness, but it had also brought us to the edge of a precipice, and now we were teetering on the brink of a fall that would shatter everything we held dear. The cold days of winter continued to envelop our town, but a different kind of frost had settled over my life. The secret that I had harbored for months was no longer just mine to bear. The revelation came unexpectedly, shattering the fragile illusion of normalcy that I had clung to. It was a typical weekday evening when the facade finally crumbled. I was at home, the kids were asleep, and my husband was watching TV. That's when the doorbell rang, an innocuous sound that would normally not have caused any concern. But when I opened the door, I was met with the sight of my neighbor's wife. her eyes red and her expression a mix of anger and pain. The confrontation that followed was a blur of accusations and revelations. She had found evidence of our affair, irrefutable proof in the form of messages and pictures. Her voice trembled with emotion as she recounted her discovery, each word like a dagger to my heart. My husband, drawn by the commotion, joined us at the door. The look of confusion on his face quickly turned to shock and then to anger as he realized the gravity of the situation. The world as I knew it was unraveling before my eyes. The conversation that followed was one of the hardest I had ever endured. I had to face not only the hurt and betrayal I had caused my husband, but also the pain I had inflicted on an innocent woman. The guilt that I had managed to suppress for so long was now overwhelming, suffocating me with its weight. My neighbor's wife left after delivering her painful message, leaving me to face the aftermath with my husband. The air was thick with tension and unsaid words. The betrayal hung heavily between us, a barrier that seemed insurmountable. The days that followed were a haze of difficult conversations, tears, and heartache. My husband was devastated by the betrayal. The trust that had been the foundation of our marriage was shattered, and the future of our family was now uncertain. As for my neighbor, the exposure of our affair had a profound impact on his life as well. His marriage was in turmoil, and the strain it put on his relationship with his daughter was evident. The affair that had started as a secret shared between two unhappy individuals had spiraled into a situation that hurt everyone involved. In the midst of this turmoil, I was forced to confront the reality of my actions. The affair, which had once seemed like an escape from my monotonous life, had brought nothing but pain and destruction. I had been seeking happiness in the wrong place, and now I was paying the price. The emotional toll of the exposure was immense. I struggled with feelings of guilt, shame, and regret. I had caused so much pain to the people I cared about, and the realization of that was crushing. The affair had been a mistake, a lapse in judgment that had far-reaching consequences. As the chapter of the affair came to a close, I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken life. The future was uncertain, and the road to healing and forgiveness seemed long and daunting. The affair had changed me, and now I had to find a way to move forward, to learn from my mistakes and rebuild my life. The final chapter of my story is one of reckoning and reflection. The affair that I thought would bring me happiness ended up costing me everything. In seeking what I thought was missing in my life, I lost what I had, a painful irony that wasn't lost on me. Karma, it seemed, had a way of balancing the scales. In the aftermath of the exposure, my life as I knew it fell apart. My husband, unable to forgive the betrayal, decided to end our marriage. The divorce was a painful process, not just for us but for our children as well. They became the unintended victims of my actions, caught in the crossfire of a situation they neither understood nor deserved. My relationship with my neighbor also came to an abrupt end. The affair had been built on a foundation of secrecy and desire, and once those were stripped away, there was nothing left to sustain it. He went back to his family, trying to salvage what was left of his marriage, leaving me to face the consequences of our actions alone. The loss of my husband, my lover, and the life I knew was a heavy price to pay. I was left to confront the harsh reality of my actions. The affair, which had started as an escape, turned into a catalyst for destruction, affecting not just my life but the lives of those around me. As I navigated through the aftermath, I had a lot of time to reflect on my choices. The pain and hurt I caused were immeasurable, and the guilt was a constant companion. I had acted selfishly, driven by my desires, without considering the impact on my family and others. The realization of this was a bitter pill to swallow. The concept of karma became a recurring theme in my thoughts. I had betrayed my husband, declaring that I didn't care about him.